freelancing to remote jobs, Africans are leveraging the internet to monetize their skills, tap into global markets, and create a better future for themselves. Well, to unpack more on the online gig work, I'm joined by Namita, Datta, principal economist and lead author of the report, Working Without Borders, the Promise and Peril of Online Gig Work. Well, thank you for joining us for today on Africa Hustle. And just to set the context, can you briefly explain the concept of side hustles and gig work, and also how does gig work differ from traditional employment?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me. So in terms of definition, what do we mean by online gig work? Gig work, online gig work in particular, particularly refers to tasks that a company, it could be a small company, it could be a large company, it could be even a single person company, that task is posted on a platform, a digital platform, and that platform uses an algorithm to then connect that task to a worker who is also registered and has an account on that platform. The task is done online, completed online, and the payment is also done online. This is the definition of online gig work. Now, you could think about it broadly in two categories. The first is what we call online micro work. This is a task that literally takes a worker a few seconds to finish. These are very small tasks. The payment involved is also very small. It involves doing things like tagging an image, which literally takes you a few seconds to do. But there's another category that's called online freelance work, which is a little bit more complex, takes a little longer, could take a few days, could take weeks, could also take months. But this involves things like maybe the design of a software or the design of a digital marketing a campaign or even maybe translation. So those are the two broad categories. They're very different from what we might call location-based gig work, which a lot of us are familiar. We see on the streets, like ride hailing and food delivery. That's not what I'm talking about. This is mostly a task that would be done online. Now, when we conducted this study, we were quite surprised at the scale of this. We already know this is happening, but never was there like a real detailed global study that estimated and quantified how many people are doing this kind of work, online gig work. It's close to 435 million, which is almost 12% of the global labor force, and this is rapidly increasing.
Well, can you walk us through the methodology, rather, behind the Working Without Borders report, and how is the data compiled, and what sources and research methods are you used to gather insights for the report?
Yeah, so we had to think a little bit outside the box because traditional labor force surveys do not gather this information. So we had a big blend of different methods. We conducted a very massive global online survey. We conducted it in 17 countries. And we did it in 12 languages because we were very mindful of the fact that if you just do it in English, you might pick up only those people who are working on perhaps the larger global platforms, which are mostly English speaking. But we wanted to understand, what about people who speak Arabic? What about people who speak Swahili? So we did it in 12 languages. We also combined this kind of a global survey with a lot of data science methods using assessments of global traffic, website traffic data, natural language processing, a whole lot of data science methods. We looked at some proprietary firm databases to try and estimate how many platforms there are. We also combined it with specific surveys on some platforms. Plus, on the demand side, we conducted a very large firm survey, almost over 1,000 firms that we surveyed to understand what was their motivation to hire gig workers. So it's a big blend of a lot of methodologies because there's no one traditional data source that's available.
Just to get an in-depth understanding, what role does technology and digital platforms play in facilitating gig work in Africa?
It's all digital, right? You have to have access to the internet. You have to have a mobile device. Even a phone is okay, but in some cases, certain more complex tasks may require you to have a laptop, perhaps. But more than anything, you require reliable internet. And of course, you need power, access to power to be able to charge your devices. So yes, it is quite digital.
And how does the African market uniquely support or challenge gig workers, well, according to your research?
So Africa is very interesting. So out of the 435 million workers that we estimated across the world, Africa still is not as big. It's 22 million. But what is interesting about Africa is the massively a rapid rate at which it's growing. It's really growing very rapidly. And obviously, it's growing because internet penetration rates are growing in Africa. But also, in some cases, it's growing because, frankly, there are not enough good quality jobs that are out there. So entrepreneurial young Africans are finding these out-of-the-box, innovative, fast emerging kinds of jobs to be able to earn a living. But why are Africans turning to this kind of work? There are a lot of reasons. One is, I think, a lot of young people are turning to this kind of work to simply build their digital skills. Secondly, a lot of them are obviously doing this kind of work to earn an income. In particular, you have to remember that there aren't enough good quality jobs either in their city, in their country. So through these platforms, they are able to access global jobs. They are able to access the global labor market. In some cases, and this is very interesting from the point of view of countries where they particularly want to support female participation, labor force participation. In a lot of cases, young women are participating in this kind of work because it allows them the flexibility to combine it with their care responsibilities and also work from home. It gives them the flexibility of time, and you don't have to actually go to a place of work. But also, a lot of people are doing this kind of work for managing income shocks. Let's say you just lost a job, or there's a big health emergency in the family and you really need that additional income. And when there aren't not enough other income earning opportunities, people use this kind of these kinds of jobs. But also they build skills in the process.
So what policy changes or regulations affect the gig work industry in Africa, and how can gig workers mitigate risks?
So this is it's a very good question, and it's a question we really reflected a lot on. We thought a lot about it because you have to remember the context of this kind of work, right? I mean, the context. A lot of the earlier literature has been talking about the emergence of gig work in the developed country markets. But when you shift the context to, let's say, Africa, you have to remember that more than 80% people in Africa are anyway in the informal sector. They are working in the informal sector, which means that they are working in jobs that are outside the purview of labor regulation. So gig work is no different. So one of the challenges, in fact, one of the biggest challenges of this kind of work is that it is completely outside labor regulations. Number one. Number two, people who are doing online gig work do not have access to some of the benefits that you would have access to if you were doing a formal job, right? For example, access to medical insurance or being able to save for your old age, for example, a pension, or being able to take leave if you are sick. Those sorts of benefits that you usually associate with a formal job is not available to an online gig worker. But then those benefits aren't available to a large majority of Africans anyway, right? So the challenge for regulation in a context like Africa is that you don't know how to regulate it. It's hard to think about that right regulation. Why? Because there is as much a risk of over-regulating this as there is of under-regulating it. Right now, there's not a lot of regulation. But if you come in heavy-handed with a regulation that doesn't fit this kind of context where the world of work is changing, you might actually end up killing these income earning opportunities that a lot of young people have. So the question then is, how does one regulate it? How does one come up with a policy framework that allows you to take this, make use of this opportunity to give young people, by the way, 30 and 50% of online gig workers globally, and it's actually 60% in Africa, are below the age of 30. So these are young people. So how do you as a policymaker make sure that this opportunity is available to a young African person, particularly young women, who we find are participating in gig work even more than they are participating in any other type of work in many countries? So this is a very interesting opportunity to build and increase female labor force participation rates. So how do you allow people to access these kinds of income earning opportunities when there is no other option really in some of their cities and countries? But at the same time, how do you make sure that people who are doing this kind of work are not exposed to abuse, or not? They have also some kind of social protection, and they have something to fall back upon. And for a lot of young people, there is also this question of: is this really a career? Is there a career progression here? So I think that there is, for policymakers, there are two things. One, in the short term, I would actually think that the African policymakers should perhaps make use of this emerging opportunity and actually try to use this to build the digital skills that young people need to grow later in their careers. And also to earn an income sometimes while they are still studying. So to use this opportunity in the short run. But in the medium to long run, I think that there is an opportunity for policymakers to partner with these platforms and perhaps think about designing more innovative social protection models that can adapt to this changing nature of work. So let's not throw the baby with the bathwater, but then let's use this as an opportunity to come up with innovative policies that work for this changing world of work, because this world of work is changing and it's going to change whether we like it or not.
And that's Namita, Datta, principal economist and lead author of the report Working Without Borders, the Promise and Peril of Online Gig Work. As we conclude today's episode, remember that Africa's entrepreneurial spirit is unstoppable. Turn your passions into profits and join the movement. Share your hustle story with us on social media using #AfricaHustle. Till next week.